So I had to visit Eastern State Pen twice. There's a ton to see here if you make it all the way to the end. And this video is narrated by a familiar voice.
Welcome to Eastern State Penitentiary. In a moment, we'll enter the cell blocks, but our tour begins here in this gravel-covered area. I'm actor and director Steve Buscemi. I'll be one of your guides as you visit the prison. You'll also hear from former inmates, guards, and the people who have studied and preserved this historic building. These are their real voices.
If you looked at the walls outside, they were like 25 or 30 feet in the air. But for inside, they were like 60 or 70 feet in the air.
Eastern State is without a doubt the most influential prison that was ever built.
You're standing inside the world's first true penitentiary, a building designed to inspire penitence or true regret in the hearts of criminals. The architects here believe that all human beings, regardless of their behavior, have good in their hearts. They believed Eastern State Penitentiary would inspire a new generation of prisons, worldwide, built on this optimism and faith in the human character. On the inside, Eastern State was progressive, even visionary. But on the outside, this building is a castle, a fortress, a dungeon.
Let the avenue to this house be rendered difficult and gloomy by mountains and morasses. Let the doors be of iron, and let the grating occasioned by opening and shutting them extend a sound that shall deeply pierce the soul. Benjamin Rush, 1787.
This is cell block 1. It opened in 1829. Before Eastern State, criminals were sent to places such as the Walnut Street Jail in Philadelphia to await punishment. You can see all sorts of prisoners, men and women, adults and children, petty thieves and murderers, thrown into the jail together and left to scheme or fight among themselves in crowded, unheated rooms. But as bad as these jails were, they were not designed to punish. They were simply holding pens for those waiting to receive their sentences. Flogging, whipping, public humiliation, heavy fines, public execution, these were the typical punishments of the 1700s. A group of prominent Americans were horrified by the conditions in the jails. They met just after the American Revolution in the home of Benjamin Franklin. They had a great 18th century name for their organization, the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, and they were the first prison reform group in the world. They believed convicts needed time alone, in silence, to rediscover their good nature. The early prison reformers saw solitary confinement, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity for reflection, a chance to become penitent. Look inside the restored cell and consider the case of John Curran, a 22-year-old white gardener convicted in 1829 of stealing his neighbor's horse. He received a 2-year sentence and was fined 6 cents. He was Eastern State prisoner number 6. Upon his arrival, prison staff placed a hood over his head so he couldn't get a sense of the layout of the penitentiary, and so that no other prisoner would recognize him after his release. He would wear that hood whenever he was outside his cell. In the 2 years he spent here in cell block 1, John Curran may never have seen another inmate. Curran spent 23 hours a day inside his cell. He was not allowed to speak to anyone except the chaplain or the guards, who were called overseers. He slept in his cell. He ate 3 meals a day in his cell, and he worked there as well. Prisoners made chairs, some wove fabric, others dyed cloth. Once every 2 weeks, maybe 3, he would be taken from that yard to bathe. Who would design this massive structure? The state of Pennsylvania held a competition, and a $100 prize was awarded to John Haviland, a young British-trained architect. He was faced with a huge challenge, holding hundreds of prisoners in strict solitary confinement. Now that may sound simple today, but remember that in 1829, even the White House had no running water, and the president, Andrew Jackson, used a chamber pot. Even the wealthiest Americans heated their homes with wood or coal fireplaces. Notice that each prisoner here had his own cell, roughly 8 by 12 feet, with a bed, a workbench, and a cast-iron toilet that was flushed with water once a day. Architect David Cornelius has studied these buildings since 1983. He's even explored the utility tunnels that run beneath this corridor.
There were actually a few escapes through the sewer, but prisoners usually found easier ways of escaping. Try escaping through your toilet at home.
I remember when they were new, these cell blocks had a striking church-like appearance. The cells had wooden floors and a high arched ceiling, almost like a chapel, with a round skylight called the Dead Eye. The back of each cell had a small door. It opened into a walled exercise yard, slightly larger than the cell itself, but open to the sky. Haviland designed a prison system that would allow each prisoner to be kept completely isolated from his neighbor. Gone were the rowdy crowds of thieves and prostitutes. Gone, too, they hoped, were outbreaks of typhus, or, as it was known, jail fever. Again, architect David Cornelius.
Keep in mind that in the 1830s, germs were basically unknown. People believed that illnesses were spread by bad air, which is not entirely true, but not entirely false either. And Haviland had the challenge that if his architecture didn't work, his users were going to die. It had to work. It was the 1830s equivalent of designing a spaceship wherein all life support had to be provided successfully.
John Haviland had built the first truly modern building in the United States. But would it reform criminals? Eastern State Penitentiary was now the largest and most ambitious prison in the world. And at least for a short time, the men who ran Eastern thought they were on the right track. But did inmates repent and become good citizens? What happened to John Curran, the horse thief? Prison documents show that Curran completed his sentence on November 17, 1831.
The warden reports that John Curran has left us on the 25th. I'm glad to be able to bear testimony of his sobriety and good conduct up to the hour of his leaving us, and we have a reasonable hope of his doing well.
But without the aid of photography or fingerprinting, prison staff had no clear way of tracking inmates after their release. You should be just inside cell block 7. Please go up the stairway on the right. It's steep, so use the handrail and go slowly. From the gallery, you'll get a magnificent view of the cell block with its 30-foot barrel-vaulted ceilings. I think it's one of the most striking places in the prison. The system of isolation developed in this building became known as the Pennsylvania system, and it met with great enthusiasm, especially in Europe and the European colonies. A steady stream of government officials traveled to Philadelphia to study this building, and roughly 300 prisons on 5 continents were modeled after Eastern State Penitentiary. With its enormous scale, remarkable systems of running water and central heat, and its revolutionary system of prisoner isolation, Eastern State became a tourist attraction surpassing Independence Hall. But not all visitors were so well impressed. English author Charles Dickens wrote that the 2 sites in the United States he most wanted to see were the Falls at Niagara and the Eastern State Penitentiary.
I hold this slow and daily tampering with the mysteries of the brain to be immeasurably worse than any torture of the body. Charles Dickens, 1842.
Dickens believed that isolation at Eastern State could drive men insane. And increasingly, he wasn't alone. These are the sounds of the 20th century at Eastern State.
I think I was there about 3 weeks, and then I went to 4 block, I remember, which was an old block. It was damp and stinky. The whole place seemed cold to me.
By 1940, Eastern State had become a maximum security facility with inmates serving life sentences and even death sentences. But they lived here, in the century-old shell of this once revolutionary prison. Some of these men are still incarcerated in the state of Pennsylvania. Here are the real voices of inmates and guards who remember those days.
This is what I had in my cell. You had a bed, a table, a bench, a wooden locker box, and you had a set of earphones that you plugged in 4 channels.
Everybody pretty much was assigned to a job. And this place needed a lot of upkeep. There were guys who worked in the electric shop, worked in the plumbing, did the painting, did the plastering. And the place was old then, I mean tremendously old, so there was a lot of upkeep. There was always some.
The chess playing, we played chess every day. Every day, every minute that we got. And I taught this one guard, Sloan, to play. He loved the game. And we used to sit there for hours on hours. And naturally, he did his job. We were sitting out at the desk, he could watch, do his job.
Some guys were bullies and they thought they could do this and do that, but a few of them got shanked themselves. I mean, this is like a city within a city.
It was cold in the winter and hot in the summer. I mean, sometimes you put water on yourself. There were times that you'd be in a cell, it was almost like you were going to suffocate. And there were guys who would flood their cell, just get buckets of water and throw in the cell, on the cell floor, since it was all cement anyway.
There are conditions, there are rules, there are restrictions in life that you can't possibly know about without living it. And no matter how sensitive you think you are to someone else's condition or someone else's need, until you actually live it yourself, you can't know it.
Frank Phelan was called the Birdman. Because of the type of crime that he committed, he always fashioned himself as a big shot. In 15 block, where we kept Frank, he got a hold of 2 pieces of metal and made daggers out of them. And he taped them into his hands so that he wouldn't lose them in a scuffle. Well, we finally subdued him. He was the type of person you couldn't trust because he would hurt you.
If you hit a guard at that time, the rules was that you got beat all the way to isolation. It wasn't a smack, it wasn't a kick. I never saw an inmate go to isolation just with a spank or a light bruise. That was impossible at that time. So the rules.
At the time, I thought this was a real horror, place of horrors, but, well, Alcatraz, the guards there were so brutal. Not like here. Here you had a lot of good guards. You only had 2 that I know of that was bad in Eastern State Pen.
Sloan was my guard on my block. He was like my guardian. He was the type of man, he had a little bit of a heart. Christmas, his wife made him take down all our Christmas decorations and take them into us. So we would have a Christmas tree.
There were hard times. There were times I laid myself and cried. I could hear people celebrating New Year's outside my wall. And New Year's Eve, But,
and I said, once I get my foot outside this door, this prison door, they ain't never going to see me. Because the guards used to say, well, we'll see you in 6 months. I say, well, you hang around. You hang around. Well, you have 3 doors to go through before you can get out to the street. Once I got out, I just turned around and looked. And I says, well, pal, that's the end. You ain't never going to see me again.
I wonder if the aliens built this. That's the cafeteria, but we can't get in there.
You entered through Cell Block 1, the first wing completed. Cell Block 2 housed female prisoners until they left in 1923. Cell Block 3 later became the hospital block. You can see a red cross inside a small circle in the middle of its iron gate. Al Capone had his tonsils removed there in 1929. John Haviland's original plan would have held, amazingly, only 256 inmates. The state wanted to increase that number, so with cell blocks 4, 5, 6, and 7, the architect was forced to build 2-story cell blocks. The rule at Eastern State was not only isolation, but silence. 20 inches of masonry separate each cell, and the guards walking these corridors wore wool socks over their shoes to muffle their footsteps. The warden's journal records the punishments given for breaking the rule of silence.
January 27, 1835. I discovered that 6 prisoners had been talking through holes made alongside of their hot water pipes. August 11, 1840. Female convict 1050 confined to a dark cell on bread and water for disorderly conduct, shouting, and disturbing the other prisoners. June 27, 1833. Number 102, having on several occasions got the men next to him talking and being detected in the act, last evening I ordered the straitjacket and the gag.
This was hard time.
In the gloomy solitude of a sullen cell, there is not one redeeming principle. There is but one step between the prisoner and insanity. Inmate James Morton.
The Pennsylvania system, based on silence and isolation, was competing with another model, the New York system, developed at Sing Sing. There, too, prisoners were forced into silence, but in New York, they worked together in silent factory-style workshops and ate together in huge silent dining halls. Virtually all U.S. prisons built in the 1800s were modeled on the New York system. But in Europe, South America, and Asia, the Pennsylvania system dominated. This system of physical isolation was expensive and cumbersome, and increasingly controversial. Even at Eastern State, where it was created, the Pennsylvania system gradually broke down. By the 1870s, half of all Eastern State's prisoners lived with a cellmate. Prison officials were determined to get Eastern's inmates back into isolation, and they began to build new cell blocks between the spokes of the original 7. But the Pennsylvania system was doomed. In 1913, it was finally abandoned, and the corridors around you filled with men and women, finally able to speak freely among themselves.
Welcome to Death Row. That's their outdoor yard. Alright, this is fucking creepy.
Turn to your right as you leave cell block 4 and walk around to the side of the building. Through the first low doorway, you can see into one of the small surviving yards, used by prisoners for exercise in Eastern State's early years. Contrast that to the modern baseball diamond behind you. Standing here outside the cell blocks, you can get a sense of how much Eastern State changed over time. Look at the central guard tower, with its catwalks and searchlights. It was added to the prison in the 1950s. Behind it is the old stone tower built in the 1820s. And beyond that, the modern skyline of Philadelphia. Although the architecture of this building was worked and reworked to reflect changing prison policies, it wasn't enough. Even by the 1930s, Eastern State was in trouble. The prison was outmoded, its heating and plumbing systems outdated. The corridors, and these outdoor spaces, were never intended to handle the huge crowds of prisoners that now filled them. The aging prison became increasingly hard to manage, expensive to maintain, and dangerous. The state began shutting Eastern down in the 1960s, and in 1971, the massive front door was locked. This time, to keep people out. What would become of this massive complex? The city of Philadelphia planned to reuse the site as a prison, but adapting the building proved too expensive. They decided to resell the property for commercial real estate development. The leading plans throughout the 1980s included condominiums, a shopping mall, or complete demolition. But on the eve of the decision to sell the property, a loose organization of historic preservationists, criminologists, and community leaders won out. Surely this building, the world's first penitentiary, should be preserved. But for what? Executive Director Sally Elk.
We are compelled to preserve this amazing place, to stabilize it as a ruin, and yet to restore a few places that will help us to tell its stories.
Historic Site Program Director Sean Kelly.
The American prison system has undergone an historic transformation since Eastern State Penitentiary closed in 1970. Many of these changes are illustrated on the big graph in the middle of this baseball diamond. Start by facing the graph on the side that says U.S. rate of incarceration. From this side, the graph illustrates that, for most of American history, the percentage of Americans in prison or jail was pretty steady. That began to change around the time that Eastern State Penitentiary closed in 1970. That year is represented by the low red bar. New laws and longer prison sentences throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s began to dramatically increase the number of men and women living behind bars. The tall red bar illustrates the year 2010. By that year, the U.S. prison population had grown more than 600%. There are now more than 2 million people in U.S. prisons and jails, costing Americans $80 billion every year. Crime rates have gone up and down throughout these decades. They are largely independent of the rate of incarceration. Now walk around to the right and look at the tall edge of the graph. The top of the red bar still represents the U.S. rate of incarceration. You'll see that it's the highest in the world by far. Every other nation with its rate is listed below. Our visitors often ask if some countries keep their prison populations low by executing a lot of their prisoners. To answer that question, we've divided this list into nations that practice capital punishment, they're on the left, and those that don't, they're on the right. You can see there really is no pattern. So why does the U.S. need to imprison so many people, and what are the consequences? Has this historic expansion made our communities safer? And can we continue to afford this expense? Of course, these questions are complex and opinions differ, just like they did when Eastern State Penitentiary was a model for the world. You can find our new exhibit, called Prisons Today, behind the bright red door on this baseball diamond. It explores many of these questions in greater depth using innovative filmmaking and digital interactives.
There must be no doubt about whose side we're on. People who commit crimes should be caught, convicted, and punished. 100,000 police officers on the street, a 20% increase. It will be used to build prisons to keep 100,000 violent criminals off the street. When this bill is law, 3 strikes and you're out will be the law of the land. Today, the will of the American people has triumphed over a generation of division and paralysis.
You go to jail longer. Tough laws on punishment. Smart laws on prevention. You will vote for this rule.
A vote against this rule is a vote against the safety of the American people.
It's a giant leap in the fight against crime and drugs.
Now let me show you my favorite spot in this whole place. It's a secret little garden around the side of the building. The locals take care of this place. They have their own plots in there. It's beautiful. That was in there gardening was nice enough to give me some of her rosemary.